But first, we're going to talk about politics. We got 3 videos today to warm up the stream. Russia's economy is cheap. Here's 3 reasons why. We have the Blackout Blitz, which is very, very meta right now, where everybody's talking about the new type of war Russia is doing, where they just bomb everything, taking out the infrastructure. So I want to start with this one, why Russia cannot become a democracy. Into the video!
Russia,
thank God.
Defined by its geography. Size is its most distinctive trait. A trait that is both an advantage and a liability. Much of it...
It's so crazy to me that they still own that piece of shit over here, Königsberg. That's so crazy to me. Imagine you're like USA and you have like you own a little land in Kazakhstan. It's so weird.
Kazakhstan is the greatest country in the world.
Is indefensible. There are no mountains, oceans, or deserts separating the Russian demographic core from its rivals.
And it's the core, yeah.
Russia has buffer spaces in all directions.
And not a lot of soldiers from this area are going to Ukraine. No, 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 no.
But keeping a tab.
Well, USA does actually own land everywhere. For example, Panama, Puerto Rico, etc. Yeah, I was talking about Kazakhstan though. There you go.
On a nation spanning 11 time zones and nearly 200 ethnic minorities requires more than just buffer space. Holding the Russian geography together from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok necessitates either wealth or force. But since the Russian economy has always been inadequate, force is the...
I just heard in the radio today, it's finally reaching the mainstream that the Chinese protests are now in the mainstream, huh? In big Chinese cities, they're demonstrating against the zero-COVID policy of China, man, and they're asking Xi Jinping to step back. Even China now has little issues, but we all know nowadays what happens to protests in authoritarian countries, man. Look at Iran just fucking trying to execute 15,000 people.
The prevailing choice. By its very nature, the size of the
Look at that
Russian
anti-zombie army
and intelligence apparatus has to match the size of its territory. This story of how the Russian government machinery evolved.
It's insane how geared up they are. They're more geared up than the real soldiers on the front line.
Democratic state in its current territorial configuration. Despotism, it seems, is embedded into the Russian geography. And it is the unforgiving power of geography that determines the character and virtues of a people, or lack thereof. Life was tough in the 14th century, especially in the proximity of Muscovy. There were only 2 items that were commercially viable for trade.
Fur and sexy women.
Slaves and fur.
Slaves and fur, I was close. Oh God.
Cut Muscovy off from the Mediterranean slave market, leaving fur as the sole export commodity available. So, to dominate the fur trade, Muscovy expanded north. But these expansions were not hostile takeovers. Rather, the Muscovites lobbied their envoys into the courts of the neighboring provinces, forming
nice videos. I feel like I'm playing Empires. Dude, I'm telling them right click, right click. Look, I'm right clicking. Look at the game.
Later diplomatically annexed. It was a soft power policy that took well over a century to take shape. Slowly but assuredly, the medieval cities of Pskov, Novgorod, Smolensk, Vyazma, Rzhev, Mazaisk, Tver, Kolomna, Ryazan, Murom, Rostov, Vladimir, Yaroslavl, Galich, Vyatka, Ushtuk, and Solikamsk all fell in line. Maps, old and new alike, do this soft power expansion no justice, because the homogeneous colors imply a homogeneous domain.
I made that logo. I think you did, right?
Regulations. But medieval kingdoms were more like conglomerates.
Yeah, dude, I swear to God, I have poop attacks all the time. About 2 months ago, I started drinking kefir. I have no more poop attacks. My poop is solid as a rock now. It's amazing.
First territories, and that's what Muscovy was.
That's not a scam.
In 1480, after integrating the last nearby Slavic realms, Muscovy turned its focus on the fertile lands to the south, which was ruled by the Golden Horde. Fur was a valuable commodity, but to grow in size and strength to seal Muscovy as a powerhouse, agriculture was needed. Slavic farmers needed to settle in the fertile farmlands south of the Oka River. To accomplish that, Muscovy needed to oust the Golden Horde. After back-and-forth hostilities, the Golden Horde fell to infighting. Several new kingdoms emerged in its place,
White Horde, oh man, don't let Twitter see
Kazan, Astrakhan, Crimea, and Sibir. Muscovite envoys acted quickly and lobbied into the courts of the Tatar kingdoms. Over the next decades, the Muscovites
I'm not playing Dragonflight, man. I'm sorry, bro. It's not happening.
Tatar courts. Muscovy slowly eroded their sovereign powers, appointed
These fucking stock videos, man. People just, hey, Sunday, you want to meet up, John? We're gonna dress up like 1,000-year-old fighters just for some nice pictures and videos.
and
sure, man, I'm coming.
And
it's actually kind of cool. I don't want to shit on them.
Strategic defenses.
It's actually kind of cool.
Finally, decided
they look
to
like
abolish
Benelux
their
characters, man.
self-rule and massacre the civilian
Talking about
populations.
Benelux, wink, wink.
By conquering the Tatar kingdom of Kazan in 1552,
Tatar is very tasty.
Muscovy transformed into a fully fledged empire, along with all its responsibilities. Kazan was situated near the confluence of the Volga and Kama rivers.
Stop talking about World of Warcraft, man.
So
World of
by
Warcraft is
controlling
fucking dead.
Kazan, Muscovy was able to expand down the Volga River towards the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and up the Kama River to the Ural Mountains. However, as Muscovy transformed
Would you
into
lob a Viking
Russia,
like that?
the
Sure,
power
man.
of the monarchy was centralized.
For merch
This
video?
came at a tremendous cost to the civilian population.
As always.
To keep tabs on the nobility, Tsar Ivan the Terrible set up the Oprichnik in 1565. It was the first political police in Russian history. Ivan used the notorious Oprichnik to undermine the influence of the nobility and control the newly emerging trading routes going through Kazan. Anyone or any house that posed even a remote threat
I mean, that's kind of cool. And that looks really historical, I guess. The way he looks.
was eliminated swiftly and completely. The Oprichnik was so competent in intimidating the populace that later
Dude, 500 years ago, they already had fucking intimidating political police, dude.
deploying it.
That's a
And
sub goal,
as
you
Russia's
motherfuckers.
economic
That's a
center of
fucking sub
gravity
goal.
shifted south and east, the political police, by then reformed and expanded, became indispensable in holding the empire together. From 1551 to 1700, Russia grew by 35,000 square kilometers
That's a lot,
per
man.
year, or one Belgium a year.
One
However,
Belgium
as
a year.
Russia grew, it made new enemies on all fronts. To the west, there were the Swedes, the Poles, the Prussians,
Yeah,
and
the
the
West they
Germans.
couldn't grow so easily.
While to the south, there were the Turks, the Tatars, the Cossacks, and the Caucasian tribes.
Shut up, chat.
Russia was extremely vulnerable to a coordinated land invasion, especially since its territory was mostly flat. What followed was a
Thank you, Lee.
period of total war where Russia fought rival powers
Look at
in
this guy,
multiple
man.
directions.
That guy gets laid a lot.
It was
That's like
either
Alex the Rambler's Chad brother.
conquer or be conquered. And while Russia became more secure the bigger it got, an unexpected liability emerged. The new territories to the south and east had wildly different ethnic and religious populations who were not loyal to the Tsar. And rival powers
Actually crazy how Russia could keep them all
exploited the
together
fealty
into one
of
country
these
for all these
minorities. So,
centuries,
to
man.
incorporate the new territories into the empire, the Russian leadership
No, a century is 1,000 years. What is 100 years? Century is 100 years.
tried to
I said
remake
that right.
the ethnic religious makeup of the regions through mass deportations, genocides, and assimilation programs.
Dude, I always like old paintings like this, man. If you look at art nowadays, it's just some woman that spreads her period blood on a white canvas. This is fucking art, man. Sweet shit, man. I like these kind of
Yet,
paintings.
even so, Russia was unable to fully erase or pacify the indigenous populations. To mitigate the threat and enforce authority over the new territories, the Russians transformed the political police into a massive security network, giving it increasingly more abilities and responsibilities. Whether it was the Prikaz in the 17th century, the Akhrana in the 19th century, or the KGB in the 20th century, the intelligence network became an essential component that kept Russia cohesive.
Crazy how that historically started 500 years ago already and still can be seen nowadays. Isn't that crazy?
Crimes were committed in the name of empire. The only brief exception to Russia's history of repression was in the 1990s. The last Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and the first Russian president Boris Yeltsin led a process of democratization. The Kremlin relinquished its monopoly on political power, and individual Russians took control of their lives. But instead of liberation, a sense of loss came to define the national mindset. The chaotic transformation of the economy, going from a communist command economy to a capitalist free market, left large segments of the Russian population behind.
I saw that in my life in East Germany, but with my parents, man. They were born and raised in East Germany, communism, and when the wall fell in 1991, that fucking blew their minds off. That suddenly, whoa, we have capitalism now? What the fuck? And a lot of people couldn't handle it. And with that came a lot of alcoholism. If you look at these communist countries that switched to capitalism, East Germany, massive problems with alcoholism. I mean, Russia, right? Ultra alcoholism.
Millions slid into poverty. The situation got so bad that in 1993, a coalition of nationalists and communists rebelled against economic reforms. A constitutional crisis emerged between the president and the parliament. To push his economic reforms, Yeltsin sought to dissolve the parliament. In response, the parliament declared Yeltsin's decision null and void and impeached him. At the same time, the country's self-aware constituent provinces were increasingly pushing for greater sovereignty from the Kremlin. By then, Russia had a few dozen federal subjects, including republics, autonomies, and territories, each home to distinct ethnicities. In southern Russia, the tiny region of Chechnya proclaimed outright independence. Things were moving fast.
That wasn't a good idea. That was not a good idea.
Filled the halls of the Kremlin. Years earlier, the Soviet Union had disintegrated into 15 republics. Now it seemed that democracy, with its minority rights, was pushing Russia towards another disintegration. No less than 21 republics, 4 autonomies, and 9 territories were on the verge of secession, and the existence of Russia was at risk.
I would almost feel like that's natural. If your country is so big, man, it makes total sense that there's these movements, right? I mean, dude, imagine you live down here and you get ruled by down here. It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
Russia could
Texas should succeed. What?
Turn to democracy, but not in its existing territorial.
As a Russian myself, I say once Putin gone, everyone gonna forget about him. The thing about Russian propaganda is very plastic today. I will disagree with you, even though I'm not a Russian. Russian culture is something that has been not built yesterday. It's been built up in hundreds and hundreds of years. And Russian culture is, we see it even in the Middle Ages, we saw that video, is oppression, is political police, is overpower, autocracy, right? There will just be another Tsar after Putin. It's like with North Korea, you kill Kim Jong-un, another guy will take over, man. It's not that easy, man.
The choice came down to security and territory versus liberty and prosperity.
I think so, Markoni.
You're
Markoni. I'm thinking about you, baby.
Opted for the former. As such, Yeltsin fortified his executive authority by returning to mass violence as a means of political organization. He shelved the parliament and then ordered the brutal invasion of Chechnya. Yeltsin then left the situation to his hand-picked successor, Putin. Democracy as a political organization was deemed too risky, so Putin invented his own sovereign democracy. The new political system had all the merits of a democracy, including a bicameral parliament, a supreme court, and a host of political parties. In practice, however, Putin's system allowed the ruling United Russia Party to take on the role that the Communist Party had once played during the Soviet era. Sovereign democracy appealed to the public's imperial nostalgia because it espoused domination over others, just as historic Russian philosophies had. Haunted by post-imperial phantom pains, the Russian leadership, but also nationalists, communists, Eurasianists, conservatives, and even some liberals believe that Western-style democracy is impossible for Russia. This shared belief is the result of history. To hold the geography
hundreds of years of history, man. How do you get that away easily?
Necessitates specific responsibilities, as notorious as they are. Despotism is therefore arguably part of Russia's geography. But then again, if Russia is sealed to despotism, let it have democracy, for it gives every person the right to be his own oppressor. I've been your host, Shirvan, from Caspian Report. Remember to play war.
Man. I wonder by the time I die in like 60 years or some shit, maybe 50. Holy shit, I'm getting old, man. How Russia's status will look like, man. Time is running. Why the Russian economy is fucked? 3 reasons why, man. Everybody's just making Russia videos nowadays, making big money.
When Putin first invaded in late February, the West imposed an unprecedented sanctions regime on the country.
And then you have these idiots, right, that like, sanctions don't work, the sanctions don't do shit. They massively work, man, massively work if you look at the data, man.
It looked like these sanctions had worked. The ruble collapsed, the Russian stock market closed, and there was some speculation that Russia was on the cusp of a financial crisis akin to that of the late 90s.
Thank you, Aussies.
However, over
Thank
the
you, guys.
subsequent months, the economic outlook in the country
Because primaries are open, guys. Check them out.
A combination
I'm going below
of
4K subs, which is kind of
exports and interventionist economic policy,
and that's why I'm
pushed
reacting
the
to
ruble
videos.
to a 2-year high and allowed the Russian state to run a healthy budget surplus, which it's used to finance its invasion of Ukraine. Now, this isn't to say that everything was wrong.
When I think about Ukraine, what Ukraine needs to do, okay, here we go. Thinking though that my opinion doesn't matter, it just needs to hold out, right? That's probably the meta, because the debuffs on Russia are bigger, man. You got, and it's hard, man. I can't imagine what these people go for right now. They're getting rocketed, civilian infrastructure getting rocketed by Russia, and the West once again just looks at that. It's fucking ridiculous, man. I can just hope, man, that these Ukrainians stay strong, and I think they will. These guys are no pussies, man. And get through that winter and just hold out against this Mordor Sauron orc army, man.
Point of view. As we explained in our videos at the time, the
I live in Turkey. Yeah, you probably have a heater though and electricity right now, huh?
Rules from the central bank requiring all exporters to give up their foreign currency, and certain sectors really weren't holding up well, including finance and car manufacturing. Nonetheless, the Russian economy did outperform.
What kind of cars are made in Russia? Lada or some shit? They have like Range Rovers in a way? It's not even that bad. They look kind of modern. Looks like a dad car.
At least the most pessimistic expectations, and its GDP forecasts, which were originally predicting a record-breaking recession, were revised upwards. For example, the IMF in April...
There has to be some kind of faking going on in Russia, that they're like, hey, our numbers are very good, nothing weird going on here. That cannot be true, and that's why, again, Ukraine just has to hold out, man. I think more and more we're going to see holes in the Russian facade.
The Russian economy would experience an 8.5% contraction, but this was upgraded to 6% in July. And the latest forecast from October now only predicts a 3.4% contraction.
It's not good.
Unfortunately for the Kremlin, though, over the last month or so, Russia's economic outlook has deteriorated significantly. Inflation remains stubbornly high, nearly 13%, and preliminary data released last week by Rosstat, Russia's National Statistics Institute, suggests that the Russian economy shrank by 4% year-on-year in the third
but it's
quarter,
an internal
meaning
institute,
that
man.
Russia has formally entered a recession.
That's good.
On top of that, falling global oil prices and reduced European demand for Russian gas has meant that Russia's budget surplus has started shrinking, which will make financing the war significantly more difficult going forward. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why Russia's economic outlook has...
I always feel like this is like Victoria Free and you're playing Russia and your GDP is going down and your money is in the red and you're trying to fix it somehow.
...deteriorated, why it could get even worse, and how it might affect the Kremlin's chances of victory in Ukraine. Let's start with falling oil and gas prices. When Putin began his invasion, Brent crude, the world's benchmark for oil prices, was trading at about $100 per barrel. Now, in thanks part to the geopolitical uncertainty created by this war, in the subsequent months, prices rose even higher, reaching a fairly stable high of about $120
It's only like 20% higher,
by
man.
mid-June. In the days before Putin invaded, on February 24th, the Dutch TTF was already trading at about 80 euros per megawatt hour. For
You think it's
context,
going down
for
again,
most
though?
of 2021, the TTF was trading at about 20 euros. However, in the months following the invasion, as European countries desperately tried to stock up on gas before the winter, prices skyrocketed, reaching a high of
I'm kind of rooting for global warming here, man. Luckily in Germany it got cold
now,
very
even
late.
though Russia was selling off its oil at a discount, these
Murdoch is
high
updated?
oil
Oh,
and
okay.
gas prices were still great
But today
news
we're
for
doing something
Russia.
bigger in
Analysis
Hoi4.
by
We're
the
doing
Center
something
for
very big today.
Research on Energy and Clean Air found that Russia's hydrocarbon export revenues were about 20% higher than average, running at nearly 1 billion euros per day.
Dude, look at this. I already have 1.3k viewers. This reaction shit is massive on Twitch. It's the new meta.
These enormous revenues allowed the Kremlin to run a massive budget surplus. For context, in January, Russia's budget surplus was a little over 250 billion rubles. But in June, when oil prices were reaching their peak, it was 5 times that, at about 1.4 trillion rubles. And this much...
What is 1.4 trillion rubles? That's like $5? I think 200,000. What? 16,000? No way. That's no way. Hey, that means 1.4 trillion rubles in dollars. What? 22 billion is like nothing. Fucking Elon Musk can buy 2 Twitters with that.
money was crucial, giving Putin the fiscal space to continue
It looks
and
like where I
expand
come
his
from, dude.
invasion of Ukraine. However, in the past month or so, oil and gas prices have started falling, and as you'd expect, Russia's budget surplus has suddenly dried up. Thanks largely to reduced demand from China.
I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but I get my news from 9gag, right? You know me, guys. I don't read the news. And sometimes he has interviews and he sits there. His hand is weird. His left hand. His left hand is always a bit weird. He always is like, like there's, I don't know if that shit is fucking real, man. But there's also a lot of Botox, man. And there's these rumors about cancer. Who knows, man? Who knows,
recession, right? Brent crude is now trading at just over $80 per barrel, well down from its June highs. Similarly,
he wants something to do with the mad babushkas.
And a well-coordinated.
Dude, I feel so sad for these women, man. Their sons died in a useless, dumb, completely dumb, stupid war, right? And then they are so indoctrinated, they go to that TV interview, man, and they're still pro-Russian. I feel just fucking sad. That is so sad, man.
The European Gas Storage Initiative, Dutch TTF, has fallen to a bit over €100 per megawatt hour.
Probably all actors. Two of them were actually actresses, confirmed.
It's down
Jesus
60%
Christ.
from its August
What the
peak.
fuck?
And it's also worth mentioning that
They were
Russia is
handpicked by
exporting
Putin.
less gas than it once was. Lower oil and gas prices combined with reduced export volume obviously imply lower revenues, which is why Russia's budget surplus
I know this all from Victoria Free.
quickly dried up. In October, Russia's budget surplus sat at just 50 billion rubles, down an
Just like
astonishing
$10,000.
95% from the 1.4 trillion high achieved in June. And that's really important, because falling revenues undermine Russia's ability to finance its war in Ukraine, especially because sanctions have limited Russia's ability to borrow on the global financial markets. Let's move on to the second
sanctions
reason
don't work,
they're
right?
struggling. Sanction-induced shortages.
They need more
When the
dice.
Russian economy was outperforming expectations, Russian state media was full of triumphant headlines about the apparent inefficiency.
I always feel like, do you, as a Russian, do you really sit at home and watch Russian state media? You're like, yeah, that must be correct. I believe this. Oh, this is amazing. Yeah.
However,
I'm Jaden
as
sniffing
Russia's
this.
central bank acknowledged at the time, sanctions were never going to have an immediate impact because
Exactly.
Russian industry could rely on stockpiles to see it through the first few months. However, as predicted, dwindling stockpiles have now given way to shortages, and it's clear that Russia is getting increasingly desperate for certain parts, especially semiconductors.
Yeah,
While
biggest
Russian
thing in the world
companies
right now,
have
man.
tried to mitigate the impact of sanctions by increasing imports from China, the fraction of faulty component imports has apparently increased from 2 to 40%. According to a report from October. This is presumably because
40%
reputable Chinese
faulty
companies
imports,
are
man.
refusing to trade with Russian businesses for fear
What
of
is that stock
reputational
video right now?
damage
Why is
or
there this black
secondary
girl?
sanctions, leaving Russia reliant on
What the
less
fuck was that?
dependable Chinese companies. Faced with severe shortages and no reliable source
He's just
of
trying to be
imports,
diverse, man, for
Russian
the YouTube money.
authorities started stripping planes for parts back in August. And in the last month or so, evidence has emerged that Russia is smuggling in European-made appliances like fridges, washing machines, and...
That's legit. I swear to God. Wow! I'm not making this up. Me and Lisa were just looking at that fridge in a market.
Wow.
even breast
I swear to God.
pumps.
Why you cup? I swear to God. Who cares? Is that a breast pump?
To get their hands on much-needed components, as
Library
well as pushing up
recently deleted.
electronics prices generally. These shortages
Library
will also undermine
recently
Russia's ability
deleted.
to manufacture military
I don't have
hardware
that.
and weapons systems, which is clearly crucial
I
for
don't
the
have
war.
that.
The third and final issue Russia's facing, though,
Should be at the bottom.
is
I don't have
human
that.
capital flight.
cares?
Any modern economy relies on highly
We chose a
trained
different fridge
and
now.
specialized workers.
Samsung.
But since Putin announced his invasion in February, thousands of these
There's
workers,
Nazis in Ukraine, but I deleted the photo, believe me,
representing a
guys.
significant fraction of Russia's human capital,
$1,000 for a fridge? That's super low, bro.
fled the country. It's estimated that between 250,000 and 500,000 Russians, mostly men of military age, fled the country in the first 6
At the
months.
500,000 flat? That's insane. If that number, I don't know how correct that number is, man, but holy shit, man.
The war. And according to British
That's what happens when you
intelligence,
have
a
a
further 170,000
war
or so
going on.
have fled in response to the partial mobilization.
Does IKEA have
announced in late
fridges?
September. And the thing is that those fleeing will be, in general, wealthier, and better educated than your average Russian. Now, obviously, losing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of well-educated young men will significantly reduce Russia's human capital. On top of that, this exodus will have a
Just overall, I think Vladimir Putin will go down in history as one of the biggest mistake makers of the 21st century, man. What a mistake the invasion of Ukraine was, man. There's just nothing to gain there. Nothing positive in that whole thing, dude. Just
lightning effect on the labor
a big misclick, man. Big misclick.
Upward pressure.
There's now estimates that 700,000 Russians fled.
Already well above the central bank's target. So, in conclusion, all of these factors, reduced revenues, component shortages, and the recent exodus, will undermine Russia's economy and, as such, their ability to wage war. And that's because reduced revenues limit the amount of money that Putin can spend on the invasion itself. And this might go some way to explaining why, for the budget in 2023, released in September, Russia only announced that military spending would be increasing by 40%, an equivalent of just 4.5% of GDP. While this might sound like a lot,
Trumbull like
given
that.
that the partial mobilization has increased the total troop numbers by 30%, it's not a significant increase in spending per soldier. On top of that, it's worth saying that historically, winning a full-scale war has required spending of more than 5% of GDP.
Interesting
that Putin
historical
hasn't
fact.
committed to. And
Historical fact, that makes Hopefully
if
moist.
Putin's economy continues to struggle, then his war effort could get increasingly
Jeez, man, that's
complicated.
civilian buildings,
Honestly,
man.
when doesn't maths get pretty complicated? If
The
you
big
want to
loser of
improve
war is
that
always
for yourself,
civilians,
though,
man.
You should check out the courses over on Brilliant, because the world has never needed more smart thinkers. And
Very true, very true. This one I wanted to keep for last because I'm mostly interested in this one. The Blackout Blitz doctrines now by Russia. Russia knows they can't win in infantry versus infantrymen, so they understand they have to attrition and attack the infrastructure of Ukraine. You know when you were a kid, man, and there was the sore loser kid, that kid that would always, he was like the biggest kid, the strongest kid, and he was always used to being the strongest kid. But then he would get bad grades, or somebody would fuck him up in sports, and he would like, and that's like Russia right now, right? So loser, so hey, let's just rocket the fucking civilian West, man. How fucking loser can you
Russia
be?
has a new strategy in the making. It is looking to deplete Ukraine's power generation capacity ahead of winter, hoping that the resulting blackouts will convince the Ukrainian leadership to surrender at the negotiating table. Since early October, Russia has used high-yield cruise missiles, and Iran...
The question is really how many rockets they have left. I hear reports that they're using very old rockets now, like from the Cold War and shit. In the Great Winter War, when Russia attacked Finland, the Finnish people had this thing called sisu. A lifestyle, a way of thinking that meant never give up. We're going to defend Finland until the end. And I think Ukraine is going to show a kind of sisu. They're going to show behavior that they will not back down, bro.
Iranian-made loitering munitions to strike at Ukrainian power stations. More than 300 such attacks have been verified. Videos on social media show smoke rising from cities like Dnipro, Lviv, Zhytomyr, Kremenchuk, Khmelnytsky, Zaporozhye, and so on. The damage is substantial. About 1/3 of Ukraine's power generation capacity is knocked out.
I heard on the radio today, the ambassador in Germany said, we need help, Germany, please send us generators and stuff, and I hope Germany reacts well with that.
4 million civilians have
They want
been hit
generators
by
and
power cuts,
something
and
else they said,
blackouts have affected the
something with
basic
car,
functions of
he was
the
asking
economy.
for.
At the same time, Russia is sending waves of
Who's the
drone
biggest
attacks to
ally
intimidate Kiev
of Russia and Europe?
from
Well, Viktor
above.
Orban, obviously.
Combined with the blackouts, Putin hopes to wear
And all
down
the people in
the
their
Ukrainian
pockets.
population and force Zelensky...
Hey, for the situation he's in, he looks pretty good, man. He looks pretty good. Biden signed another 300 mil. Yeah, and then you have these Americans on Twitter. Why are we sending money to Ukraine? And obviously, Donald Trump jumps on it. Oh, why is Biden sending money to Ukraine? You will fucking do the same, bro.
No.
According to Kiel, the US has transferred military and non-military aid worth of $54 billion to the government of Ukraine. 2020, $778 billion. Wow. And 54 of that go to an actual war zone? A country that actually fights our enemies? How can she slap? I'm gonna vote for Donald Trump.
to sue for peace.
Come on.
Routed, defeated, and facing enormous
It's 91 billion?
territorial
Well,
losses
still,
in
that's
Ukraine,
91 billion
the
into
Russian military
778.
command is increasingly running out
Helping
of
a country that
options.
actually
They
needs
want to
fucking
win,
help?
regardless of the costs.
I don't know.
And
I don't
in
know.
such desperate times, it does not matter whether the cat is black, brown, or white, as long as it catches mice.
Oh shit, well said, man. Well said.
Is predominant, both as a deterrent to conflict and in the eventuality of war
what the
as
fuck?
a devastating operation
Jesus
to
Christ.
destroy an enemy's capacity to wage war. Regrettably,
All
bombing
civilian
civilians
targets, man.
is one of the most common air strategies to this day. It is thoroughly embedded into
You just hope that history is gonna bring justice, man. Even though if you look at history, justice is often not brought. I wish there would be
military
justice for this.
doctrines. And yet,
That will
it
probably
is
never
a
happen.
flawed
That's the
strategy,
world
deeply so.
we live in.
The idea traces its roots to World War I, when Italian General Giulio Douhet theorized that air power could break the enemy morale. Douhet identified 5 strategic target types
Strat bombers
for
in 4,
aerial
man.
warfare:
Heavy stuff, heavy stuff.
industry, transport, infrastructure, communications, and government. Supposedly, by striking at these 5 targets, the will of the enemy population would demoralize, and civilians would demand their government to surrender or cut
I have not
deals
watched
to
this, no.
abandon territory. Air forces were still a new thing back then, and Douhet's theory fired up the imagination. It fit the get tough narrative, but it also inadvertently achieved one primal desire: revenge. Whenever conflict
Damn.
comes close to home,
That's deep shit.
societies will want revenge for the actions of their rivals. Thus, public punishment and political victory sat at the heart of Douhet's air power theory, and every major power expanded its air forces with the assumption that attacking civilians was the key to winning modern conflicts. The air power theory directly and indirectly inspired
What is the most just war in your opinion? That's obviously a very deep question that's hard to answer, but I think if you look at history, there's certain wars that are useless and only for power gain, and there's certain wars that are necessary. I think landing on Omaha Beach is a very just thing to do compared to, hey, let's go into Ukraine because Putin said so. There obviously is a difference. Certain civil wars, World War I seems rather useless, yeah.
civilian bombing campaigns during World War
If I had to write Sun Tzu, right, I would put in this chapter. If your general population and your general military believes they are part of a just war, they're going to perform much better than in an unjust war. You know, like Ukraine is performing very well because they know, dude, we're defending our country against evil. While Russia is underperforming because Russian soldiers know maybe deep down, dude, what are we doing here? We're just stealing fucking washing machines. What the fuck is this shit, you know?
I, World War II, and all the armed conflicts that played out during the Cold War. And yet, there was one flaw to the theory.
It's psychology, I think. A soldier should believe he is working for something just.
Never in history has there been a nation that, under the pressure from hostile bombardment, protested against its government to pursue peace. It has never happened.
Wow.
German
Yeah, listen to
bombers
that.
killed more than 40,000 people in London.
So maybe if you really even theorize, what Putin should have done is he should have done some kind of fake strategy to make the population or the world think that Ukraine is more evil. He didn't prepare it well enough. Right? Ukraine are Nazis. Idiot. Who the fuck believes that, man? Some fucking retard with 70 IQ. Should have prepared that a bit better, man.
On Japan killed more than 700,000 civilians. Yet neither nation pressured its government to surrender. During the Vietnam War, America dropped more than 260 million bombs on Laos, while during the Afghan War, the Soviet Union essentially depopulated the countryside through a scorched earth campaign. And yet,
What an evil
no
country
civilian
Russia actually is. I mean,
uprising ever took root
all
in
countries are evil,
Afghanistan
yes,
or
I know.
Laos. Quite
But in
the
recent
opposite.
times, Russia is
In
kind of the
nearly all
model on this
cases
planet.
of
Thank you,
civilian
Testudo,
bombing,
man.
The targeted nation was actually motivated to counterattack and perceive the collateral damage as a price to pay for sovereignty and independence. Bombing civilian targets is a doomed strategy. It is almost guaranteed to
that's a
fail
deep video.
because it actually strengthens the resolve of the
Some YouTuber
targeted
tells you that,
society.
Vladimir Putin. I don't know.
Russia's new
Maybe you
air
should listen.
strategy to destroy Ukraine's power supply ahead of winter is no different. By destroying the electrical power of the civilian economy, other civilian utilities are also affected, including water supplies and centralized heating. So the damage multiplies across society. Putin hopes that by cutting off the Ukrainian population
these hands,
from
bro, it's so
water,
awkward. These hands are so awkward,
electricity,
man.
and heating, Zelensky will concede that
Look at that old fucking phone. My grandma used this in the 70s, bro.
the negotiating table. The Russian Air Force is working around the clock to make that goal happen. Almost one-third
not
of
happen.
Ukraine's power generation capacity has been knocked out already. But Russia's strategy is also aimed at the West. First and foremost, it is meant to instigate a new wave of refugees from Ukraine into Europe. Officials in Kiev have asked Ukrainian refugees abroad not to return this winter because the energy
Clever.
network cannot endure.
Clever.
At the same time,
Makes sense.
Moscow looks to increase Europe's financial costs of supporting Ukraine. Historically, Ukraine has enjoyed an energy surplus. Now, however, it has started importing energy from Europe while its treasury is stretched thinly. To pay for the transaction, Ukraine needs to borrow between $3 and $4 billion every month from the IMF to make it through the coming winter. This sum
gonna be very
could
in-depth.
quickly inflate when considering additional costs like social and infrastructure.
But it's crystal clear, man, that I heard on the radio today, when the war's over, whatever shape or form, the West is going to massively build up Ukraine, man. They're going to have funds. There's going to be a lot of investment, man. They just talked
Meanwhile,
in the German government
Zelensky
about
has
that today, I
asked
think.
foreign donors for $55 billion to cover the budget deficit, including $17 billion to repair the
Like a
energy
Marshall Plan, yeah,
infrastructure.
that's gonna totally
Taken
happen, man.
together, these are some serious
I'm even
numbers,
thinking about
and
investing into
European
Ukraine ETFs when it
lawmakers will
happens,
find
because I think that
difficult
will
to
make a lot of money.
justify their commitments to Ukraine while their own constituents pay the financial price.
Austria is not in NATO? I swear to God, I didn't know that, bro. They were forced to be neutral after World War II. I never understand that stuff. It's 2022. Let Austria fucking join, man. I don't understand that. Well, it opens the possibility for another Anschluss.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
And
Let's
yet,
go back to the video.
Ultimately, Russia's strategy will fail. History has plenty of examples, but the most
I like how it takes the
similar
ball to
is
say
the
that.
Gulf War.
Like-
The United States disrupted more than 90% of the Iraqi power grid, leaving millions of Iraqis without power. But regardless of how badly Iraqi society was wounded, they did not yield. No protest or uprising took place against Saddam's rule.
Are you pro Anschluss? In my opinion, Austrians are fucking Germans, man.
I was acting.
The Russian command is using a tried and failed playbook. Dozens of energy installations have thus far been targeted, but a nationwide
And not just 100 years ago, 99% of them were like, ja, ich will heim ins Reich, ja!
blackout in Ukraine is unlikely. Russia is believed to be lacking in munitions, and even if
They
it
need some
could
saboteurs,
double its
man, on
firepower
airports, man.
and
Need to
maintain the
sabotage the
attacks,
Russian airplanes, dude.
it would do no good. According to a nationwide poll conducted by the Kiev International
Nice.
Institute of Sociology, at least
I hope that's not a fake,
86% of respondents support Ukraine's continued
thingy, but that
counteroffensive
looks
in spite of
86%,
the
man.
recent
Beautiful, very
airstrikes
nice.
against civilian targets. In short, there is no reason to assume that Russia.
Do you have a speech for the Austrian people? Dear Austrians, if you join Tommy's Germany, I will make sure that all your leaders are not Russian puppets anymore, selling your whole country on Ibiza, and there will be no more young big-eared that completely and utterly are corrupt and pay the Kronenzeitung for their own political gain. Thank you,
Civilian
Austrians.
targets
Please join me.
or energy infrastructure will convince Ukrainians to give up. Now, air power is still a decisive factor, but only when it is used in combination with ground forces to achieve military objectives rather than punishing civilians. Just compare the tactics of the Russian Air Force to that of Ukraine. The way to use an air force effectively comes down to the following. Ground forces need large numbers to withstand a ground assault, oftentimes forming thick and overlapping front lines. However, those large concentrations make for juicy targets from the air. So, as a countermeasure, ground forces will disperse across a wide area to make airstrikes less effective. This then, however, leaves the thinly stretched ground forces vulnerable to defeat on the ground. That's how Ukraine was able to overwhelm the
That's such a
Russian
good
front
video, man.
lines in Kharkiv. Ukrainian forces pinned down enemy contingents, while others routed enemy forces by a pincer move. This has been Ukraine's primary strategy in rolling back Russian forces in the east. Even the best dug-in Russian troops have been bested. The only tactical difference is that Ukraine tilted the battlefield in its favor not by use of an air force, but by HIMARS missile systems. The United States has provided
Holy shit, the new political streamer TommyKay. Fuck it.
16 HIMARS
This is still
with
a game
another
channel.
18 on the way. Precision weaponry has advanced substantially in recent years. It is more affordable and readily available. Modern air power can destroy large
look at that technology,
concentrations
bro.
of enemy ground
Scary.
forces, but also take out smaller and even individual targets on the battlefield. When applied correctly, as Ukraine does, the HIMARS have the firepower and effectiveness of several F-16 fighter jets.
Jeez, he must seem
But
very meta, huh?
since the HIMARS
What's up, Rochi?
operate on the ground, they enjoy greater flexibility in coordinating with Ukrainian ground forces and thus can be used against the Russians in any given area.
You know what's weird? Do you guys feel the same? When the war in Ukraine started, there was this little silent voice in the back of my head that's like, why don't you jog? There's a small chance that you have to go to war, you should work out. What? Like, I wonder, if they make a study, if the average male in Europe is working out more the last 2 years, I wonder. Imagine a study would say it went up by 10%, because there's this little voice in the back of your head that's like, oh, war's back on the menu, maybe I should weigh 200 pounds.
Been able to
I'm actually working
successfully
out because of the war.
encircle and overwhelm their Russian counterparts
Thank you, Manu,
in
my dude.
Kharkiv
Thank you
and
very much.
places elsewhere. So while the Russians employ
I'm Serbian,
an
surrounded by
old,
NATO, the
flawed
voice is
air
very loud.
strategy, the Ukrainians are going by the new combined arms playbook. And while Russia can bomb Ukrainian cities and civilians as much as it wants,
I
it
started
will not
airsoft
change
after the war.
battlefield. Russia's strategic failures in Ukraine cannot be fixed by brute force. 8 months into the war, and it's safe to say that Russia could have done things differently on many occasions.
It's safe to say.
Nothing it did was inevitable, but everything has since become irreversible.
Very good video, man.
Shirvan from
I like how he has
CaspianReport.
balls and
If
says
you
it as
like-
this. Very, 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 very good video, man.